We're back after a month, and I hope you've been meditating on the text and studying it. It's really quite rich, and Nagarjuna has a lot to say that's of great value to us if we really put our energy into the text. Yeah. So, let's start off with our motivation, and then we'll continue on from where we left off. Okay, so think a bit about the causes to attain a precious human life, how difficult it is to create ethical conduct, pure ethical conduct. Because if you look around, most people on this planet are operating under the influence of the self-centered thought, creating a lot of negative karma, contradicting the 10 virtuous paths of action. And we too are sometimes enticed by the immediate benefit we can get from breaking the precepts or acting in a self-centered way. And so putting all these imprints in the mind of destructive actions makes it very likely that we'll have a lower rebirth, not an upper rebirth. So considered from that viewpoint, the fact that this lifetime we even have an upper rebirth, not even a precious human life, but just an upper rebirth, that alone is really quite special. And then on top of that, having practiced generosity, fortitude, joyous effort, concentration, wisdom, and so on, in previous lives, that too did not come easily. And again, if we check around in this world, you know, how many people really practice heartfelt generosity with a good motivation without expecting anything in return? Not so easy. Much easier to have expectations, much easier to save things for ourselves and our dear ones, rather than share them with others. And then even when we do create virtue, do we dedicate it for full awakening or even a good rebirth? Or rather, do our aspirations and prayers go more towards the happiness of this life? May I be well, may I have a long life, may I have wealth and a good reputation, and so on. So just look at what we aspire for, and how often is it a Dharma aspiration. So if we really check in this life, now how difficult it is to create the causes necessary for good rebirths in future lives, we'll see how difficult it is. And that makes the fact that we have a precious human life this time around even more wondrous, more amazing. Like, how in the world did we ever manage to have a life endowed with the freedoms and fortunes that we have to practice the Dharma? It's really quite astounding when you think of it. And so rather than waste our time on the 8 worldly concerns, we really need to put our time and energy into creating the virtuous causes for good future lives, because if we wish to attain Buddhahood, we need a series of good rebirths in which to practice and fulfill the two collections. And here's where the generation of bodhicitta comes in, because it is an excellent antidote to the 8 worldly concerns, and it also enables us to create huge causes for Buddhahood. So let's generate that bodhicitta motivation. And really put the welfare of other living beings at the center of what we're doing. So, where we left off in the precious Garland was talking about, the importance of creating the causes for a good future life, for the long-term purpose of attaining liberation and full awakening. And so Nagarjuna explained to us the different results of our actions, virtuous and non-virtuous actions, in order to motivate us, because so often we don't think of the results of our actions. We just do whatever feels right at the moment, or whatever's going to be the most self-serving in the moment, without really thinking in the long term. So he explained the fruitional results, or what we call the ripening results. In other words, the rebirths that we take from creating the 10 virtuous paths of action and the 10 non-virtuous paths of action. Then he explained the result, the concordant results. Okay, so some results are concordant with the cause in terms of the habitual action that we do, so the habit to do an action again and again. And then another result is concordant with the cause in terms of experiencing things similar to what we've caused other people to experience. Okay? And so to think about these both in terms of the 10 paths of virtue, 10 paths of non-virtue, and then also the environmental result, where we're born and the conditions of what we have around us. So when we really reflect deeply on these, it is a strong motivator to practice. So I really recommend that you make some charts, and you list the 10 non-virtuous passive action, the 10 virtuous passive action, and then you go through these 4 results. I'm counting 4 here because the result concordant with the cause has 2 branches. And make yourself a chart so you really see the different results of all these different actions. And then, and then think about when you've done different things, lying or unwise sexual behavior or creating disharmony or, creating harmony or protecting life and things like that, and really see, look at what you've done in your life and see the kinds of results that that you've created the causes to have. And doing that can be a big impetus to purify our negativities, and also to be much more mindful of our precepts and of what we want to do and don't do. And it also increases our introspective awareness so that we monitor our mind. It increases our conscientiousness, so we really value ethical conduct. So I really encourage you on your own to make up that kind of chart and really include it in your meditation, when you do Lamrim meditation. And then I had also mentioned before, because there was a previous verse where we talked about, I can't remember the number, maybe somebody else has it, but the 4 emotions that we often engage actions: partiality, anger, fear, and what was the last one? Confusion. Yeah. Okay, so these 4 come in the Vinaya. Yeah, we read them today. So partiality means like attachment, anger, fear, and ignorance and confusion. And here ignorance and confusion refers to confusion about what to practice and what to abandon, what is wholesome, what is not wholesome.
Those are 4 emotions that do what?
Well, these are 4 emotions that come up in the Vinaya, by which they say we often create non-virtue. Okay? And some of the precepts, remember? Partiality, anger, fear, and confusion. Yeah? And so one person who's watching all the teachings from New Zealand, she made up a whole chart, with these 4, and with the chart of the 4 across here, and the 10 non-virtuous paths of action going down, and then made specific examples, that she could think of, for example, we have harsh words, creating them out of attachment, creating them out of anger, creating them out of fear, creating them out of confusion. And so, she made up a very nice chart. She said that sometimes the difference between attachment and fear was not so clear. And I think that's true, because a lot of times our fear is based on our attachment. In other words, the more attachment we have, the more fear we have. Because when we're attached to something, then we become very anxious if we have the object or the person of losing it. And if we don't have it, we're anxious and fearful of not getting it or of getting the opposite of it. Okay? So that's why attachment and fear often come close, or attachment and anxiety. They're quite related. So, when you're drawing up your examples, you don't need to think, when you do the one of fear, that it can't have any element of attachment to it, because chances are it does have some element of attachment. Similarly, the more attachment we have, the more anger we have. Yeah, because attachment is pulling things towards us, and when somebody interferes with us getting what we want, we get angry. So the more we have craving and desire, the more angry we get when somebody interferes with it. Similarly, the angrier we get when we lose what we want. Okay? So here you really see quite clearly, and it's good to think about this in your life and make examples, of what you get angry at, and see the attachment that lies under it, or what you're afraid of, and see the attachment and clinging that underlies it. Yeah, because it really helps us to to see how these things work together. And sometimes in doing this, we get to some very basic human, you could call them instincts, okay? So, perhaps we're afraid of violence, or we're afraid of getting killed, when you think of that. Well, why does fear of violence and fear of being killed come up? Because we're very attached to our bodies. Okay? So regular worldly people are going to say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody has attached to their body. It's normal for human beings. Okay? But Dharma people are going to say, well, attachment is attachment. And, why are we attached to this body? It's just flesh and blood, and it's not so beautiful, it's not so attractive. Do you really want to cling on to it, especially when you're dying? Because if we look at the insides of this body, is it something fantastic? Yeah. I mean, what are the insides of this body? It's like yuck. Okay. So is this body worth clinging to? Is this body I and mine? Is it who we are? Yeah. So we get into some very basic questions of identity, and that are very fundamental to cyclic existence. Yeah. So these are the kinds of questions that other people are not going to ask, because they just assume that attachment to your body is normal. Yeah, well, Buddhists say, well, yeah, it's normal if you're a deluded sentient being, but if you want to stop being a deluded sentient being, you've got to get rid of this kind of thing. Yeah. So it has a Buddhist practitioner has different definitions of some things than a worldly person does. Okay? So that's why, in NVC we run across these things where it says this is, a very natural human thing. We all want security. We all want safety. Well, yeah, from the viewpoint of being a regular human being, of course, everybody wants security and safety. Yeah, but from the viewpoint of what is possible in samsara, security is impossible. Safety is impossible. So then the question comes, well, what is safety? If you can't find safety in samsara, where can you find it? If you can't find security in samsara, what is secure? And then we get into, liberation, and how liberation, it provides real security, real safety. But in samsara, where are you going to find those? Everything's constantly changing. We die and get reborn. We die and get reborn. Nothing secure about that, especially when our new rebirths are conditioned by our actions, and so many of our actions are created under the influence of ignorance. So there's nothing secure in that, and safety. Yeah, when we create negative actions, why do we expect only to experience happiness? When we treat others with anger and hatred and hostility, why do we expect benevolence and safety from them? Okay? So, from a Buddhist viewpoint, we have to look at a lot of these topics in a quite different way than ordinary worldly people do. Okay? So we've got to, at the beginning, this may rattle you. Yeah? It rattles a lot of things. But, having our samsaric assumptions and our clingings and cravings rattled, that's something good, because these assumptions and clingings and cravings actually in the end are responsible for our misery. Yeah? So having them rattled may initially make us shocked, and we may say, oh, that's misery, that's suffering. But It's only when we can look at these things that we can do something with them. So it's kind of like, sometimes we're like somebody who doesn't feel well but doesn't want to go to the doctor, because the doctor may tell you that you have diabetes or kidney disease or heart disease, and you don't want to hear that. That's too scary. So you don't go to the doctor even though you don't feel well. Yeah? Yeah, we're like that, aren't we? Okay? Because we don't want to hear the news, because the news is scary. But if we don't go to the doctor and get the diagnosis, then we can't treat whatever disease we have. So it's not getting the medical treatment, because we're afraid of what the doctor's going to say, is kind of a recipe for an early death, isn't it? But look, this is just an example on a worldly level, how much we resist often going to the doctor. Yeah, because we don't want to hear anything unpleasant. So even more so when we go to the doctor of the Buddha, who's going to say, hey, the whole way you're looking at things is upside down. And we go, I want to be told that everything I look at is upside down. That's too nerve-wracking. That's too scary. Can't I just kind of continue to believe in my hallucinations? Well, and the Buddha's going to say, well, yeah, sure, you can continue to believe in your hallucinations, but what's the result going to be? Yeah? So if, here's, when they talk about having fortitude to practice the Dharma, here's where it comes in. It's the fortitude to deal with some of these, shall we call them inconvenient truths? Not only inconvenient, downright scary truths. Yeah? So it takes some fortitude, some internal strength to be able to look at these things. Okay, so, if you feel a little scared, you're in good company. But, remember the benefits of looking at these things and the disadvantages of not. Yeah, and that will help you be more courageous. And especially, to know that when we can look at these difficult topics and sort them out and get rid of a lot of this craving and stuff that we make up, then we'll actually be much happier and much more secure than we were when we were placating ourselves with lies. Yeah? Okay. So, requires some internal strength, some internal courage. Yeah? So, all us wimps, it's the time to get unwimpy. Okay. So we finished verse 19. We were just going to start verse 20. Okay, so this comes under the outline of the individual explanation of the results of virtue and non-virtue. And verse 20 is one of the very famous verses that come out of this text. And you'll notice as we go along, there are certain verses that you will find quoted in so many other treatises and commentaries. Yeah? So this is one of them. Attachment, anger, and confusion. What are those three often called? Yeah, the three poisonous attitudes, okay? Attachment, anger, and confusion, and the karma that arises from them are non-virtuous. Non-attachment, non-anger, non-confusion, and the karmas that arise from them are virtuous. Okay, so attachment, it's kind of, we can see some levels of attachment, why they're considered non-virtuous. If somebody's very greedy, for example, and they steal or they exploit or they deceive in their business deals and their political machinations, whatever, out of attachment, or even in their private lives, people doing things out of a lot of attachment. We can see why the attachment is non-virtuous and why those actions are non-virtuous. Okay, that's we can understand that. Okay, now some actions, some kinds of attachment are more difficult for us to see as non-virtuous because those attachments make us feel good. And according to worldly people, those attachments are the meaning and purpose of your life that you should run after and procure at all costs. Because then you are normal. Okay? So these are attachments, for example, relationship attachments, romantic attachments. Yeah? This is what society encourages us to do. And if you're not so interested in them, people think, oh, what's wrong with you? Because this is the source of all these theater plots and movie plots and songs on the radio and dramas in people's lives. Yeah, aren't they? Yeah, I mean, if you don't talk about your relationship problems, and your relationship glory, what are you going to talk about? Yeah, I mean, we love to talk about this. Oh, I fell in love. You spend hours talking about this kind of thing, okay? So those kind of attachments are much more difficult to see the disadvantage of, because in the world, worldly people say that attachment is the source of pleasure. Yeah? I mean, your wedding day is the biggest day of your life, I was reading that, some people plan for their wedding even they're not in a relationship. Because just dreaming about having the wedding brings them so much happiness. I mean, you are, queen for the day or king for the day. And so these online sites about planning a wedding, people go to them even they're not in a relationship at the moment. Okay? And because this thing is like what we're taught, and having kids, the highlight of your life. Having a kid who for the next 40 years is going to move into your house.
Or more.
Huh?
Or more.
40 or more years, yes. I'm going to say, Mom and Dad, do my laundry, give me the car keys. Yeah? Yeah, my generation, we were out of the house by 18. Yeah, as soon as we could get out, we were out, But my generation's children, as long as they can stay in the house, they're in. Quite interesting. Yeah. So, some attachments are much more difficult to recognize as bringing suffering than others. Okay? And so similarly, some actions done with those attachments, it's more difficult to see them as non-virtue. Okay? Okay, for example, somebody, you want the promotion and somebody else is competing with you for the promotion and you don't think they have many good qualities, so you kind of exaggerate your virtues and exaggerate their negativities, and everybody thinks that's normal. Yeah, when you want a job, what do? Yeah, you sound your own trumpet, and I can do all these things, even though you've never done them before. Yeah, or what you say when you don't know what you're talking about is, I'm a fast learner. Yeah, I see, when people have their applications to the Abbey, kind of this, I do this and this, and I'm a fast learner. Yeah, which means I don't know any of the other things. Yeah, but that's okay to not know all the other things. I don't know half of them on the application form either. Okay, yeah. But we don't want to say that, do we? Yeah. Okay, so attachment's one thing. Anger is fairly easy to see why anger and actions done out of anger are non-virtuous. Those are fairly easy to see. Yeah, especially other people's anger and what they do motivated by their anger, especially when they're angry towards us. That non-virtue is very clear to us. Our own anger, sometimes we can see it as non-virtuous because we can see we hurt other people's feelings. Yeah, we can see we destroy relationships by our anger. But some of our anger, we have a hard time seeing that as non-virtuous, yeah, because we see it as making things right. That person's doing something that they're not supposed to do, they're breaking the rules, and so we're correcting them. We're helping them to do it right. Actually, we're angry. But we see it, we explain it to ourselves as we're helping that person act according to the rules. Yeah. When our country goes to war, yeah, do we see that as wrong? Very few people do. Yeah, but, we're angry and we're attached. Yeah. We want their oil. We're angry when there's interferences to getting their oil. So we go and drop bombs and start a useless war and get a bunch of people killed. Okay? But, yeah, at the beginning of the war, when you're doing that, that's called patriotism. And that's called valor and courage. And that whole movie, American Sniper, people loved it. Yeah? I didn't see it, I just read about it because this guy was like an #1 sniper in Iraq, killing all these people like from way far away. He was like lauded because of his ability to do this. It's very curious how karma worked. He got murdered by another vet at a shooting ground. Shooting range, yeah. Yeah, isn't that interesting? He took this other vet who was a little bit depressed to a shooting range to kind of talk to him and have a good time, and the other guy shot him.
It was accidental.
No, deliberate.
Oh, he wasn't quite well, the young vet.
Yeah, the young vet, had PTSD, and he shot this guy who was, the American star of the show. Yeah, there was some other guy who was shot too. Somebody who was some expert, somebody, in the NRA or somewhere in this whole shooting world, and somebody came into his office and shot him. Yeah, some guy who had done a lot of videos on the web about, shooting people and stunts and stuff like that. I can't remember exactly. It's quite interesting how this karma ripens. But those kind of things where the country tells you how wonderful you are and you're considered patriotic, that kind of anger is not so easy to see as non-virtuous, and the actions done under it either. Having said that, we should not be angry and hate vets. I see vets as casualties of the war. Yeah, because most vets come out of the military not at all thinking like they thought when they went into the military. Yeah. And so I think they, many of them have come to see these kinds of things, over the course of their military tours. Okay, so anger, we can see, but some anger is more difficult to see. Confusion, okay, is more difficult. Okay, now what does confusion here mean? Confusion or ignorance? Because there are different kinds of ignorance, different kinds of confusion. Okay, there's the ignorance or confusion that is the root of samsara. Okay, that's the self-grasping ignorance. And then there's the ignorance or confusion that concerns what to practice and what to abandon. In other words, what is virtuous, what is non-virtuous. So when it says here that all actions done under attachment, anger, and confusion, that those mental factors and the karma arising from them are non-virtuous. Does it mean that everything we do motivated by self-grasping ignorance is non-virtuous?
No. Well, the contaminated virtues. Virtuous that is contaminated.
Okay, so that we can still do actions motivated, while we're sentient beings in samsara, we still do virtuous actions that are motivated by self-grasping ignorance. But self-grasping ignorance itself is not negative. It is neutral, okay, or unspecified. In other words, the Buddha didn't specify it as being either virtuous or non-virtuous. So that self-grasping ignorance, okay, can also be the underlying motivation for virtuous actions. Okay, and then we also have the timely motivation, such as faith in the three jewels, or kindness, generosity, friendliness, love, compassion, all sorts of other virtuous mental factors that make those actions polluted virtue or contaminated virtue that result in good rebirths and happiness while we're still in samsara. So here in this verse, what kind of ignorance or confusion does the word confusion refer to? Yeah, the confusion about what to practice and what to abandon. Because that confusion about karma and its effects, that confusion is always something that's non-virtuous. Yeah, because that type of confusion, is the confusion that gets us into wrong views, such as thinking robbing from the rich to give to the poor is virtuous, or animal sacrifice is virtuous, or any of these kinds of things that like Jim Jones' followers, who all committed suicide together. They thought that was virtuous and was going to take them to nirvana. People who give all their money away to teachers who say, I'm enlightened, and I'm enlightened, here's the Dana bowl. You create infinite virtue by giving me all your giving me all your money. Yeah, so the person who does that, is they haven't correctly discriminated a wise spiritual mentor from charlatananda. Okay. Somebody once, I think I was in another country, a non-English speaking country. They asked me who charlatananda was. So I had to explain charlatan. Yeah, because charlatan wasn't a word in their language, Okay, so here, this very famous verse, if you don't understand it properly, then you think that every action you do in samsara is non-virtuous, in which case, everything becomes impossible. But it's talking specifically here about the confusion of what to practice and what to abandon. Okay? So all sorts of wrong views that people have. People having wrong understandings of emptiness. Yeah, thinking emptiness, they misunderstand emptiness, so they criticize the doctrine of emptiness, or they explain it incorrectly, or people denying the existence of karma and its effects, saying the Buddha just made it up in order to threaten people and get them to cooperate, So these kinds of wrong views, and then people act on them. Yeah, or people think they've accomplished things on the path that they haven't. I went to one Buddhist teachers conference many years ago, and we were discussing something, I can't remember what. It was kind of a big discussion. People felt had, some big opinions about it, and one person stood up and threw a cushion, like this, and so everybody stopped, and actually it was a zabuton, and threw it. She could barely lift it, but she threw it, and everybody stopped. And why did you do that? Well, it was crazy wisdom. Crazy, yes. Wisdom, I'm not so sure. Okay. Yeah. But, people kind of having these ideas of, how to do things. Okay. What's quite interesting here is the examples of what is given as wrong views. Because when the Tibetans teach this, they teach it from the traditional viewpoint, and so they'll quote kind of some of the actions that non-Buddhists did at the time of the Buddha when they're talking about non-virtue. For example, the people who thought that acting like a dog consumed your karma to be reborn as a dog, so they crawled around on all fours and lapped their food up. And they'll quote that kind of example. Or apparently some non-Buddhists thought if you jump on a trident and the middle spoke comes out the top of your head, that, you're going to attain liberation. So they'll quote those, and animal sacrifice, they'll quote, okay? But, and so we kind of look at that and kind of, clearly those are, wrong views, they're negative actions. But what about things, that are being brought to our attention now, like racism, or homophobia, or all kinds of, sexism, trafficking, human trafficking, trafficking of young children, sexually exploiting young children. They don't, the lamas don't teach this, and some of this stuff was just accepted as normal in ancient India. Nobody questioned it. Women's inferiority, nobody questioned it. The Buddha said, yes, women can attain a liberation just as men can, but in terms of, how you treat women in society, sexual misconduct is somebody else pays for the prostitute, but you use her. Prostitution itself is accepted, and, if you're going to blame anybody, you're going to blame the woman. You're not going to blame the pimp or the John. Okay, nowadays people are looking at this kind of thing a bit differently. And what about racism? Again, nobody talked about racism in ancient India or in Tibet. Human trafficking, little children are the property of their parents. Yeah, and if the family needs money, even nowadays, you know, in India, you send the child to work. But, you know, sending your child to work is a little bit different than human trafficking if the parent knows where the child is and wants the child to work. But what about if the parents just give the child away because they're poor and they can't feed them? Or what about if somebody is duped? Yeah? And they think they're going abroad to, you know, work in an office, but they're going abroad to, you know, and get put in jobs of prostitution. Yeah? Is that wrong view? Yeah? The people who do this, who traffic in people, you know? What about pimps thinking this is normal and natural? It's just a good way to earn a living. Yeah? What about dealing drugs? Yeah? An interesting question is, what about if you're a scientist doing scientific research? Are you responsible for how people use your research? You know, what about if you know, you're just doing the research, and then somebody else comes up with a totally non-virtuous way of using the results of your research? You know, that one I would think you don't have any you know, animosity or negative attitude. It's the person who's taking the research. But what about, you know, when they were developing the atomic bomb, and they knew how their research was going to be used? Is that included in wrong views and wrong action? Yeah, these are questions that you know, the lamas don't talk about. But I think, you know, in our day and age, we need to discuss them. We may not all come to the same answer, but I think there's so many things now that are, you know, being brought to our attention. You know, this young kid who shot up 9 people in the AME church, you know, wouldn't you call that wrong view? Yeah? I would call that wrong view. But many people in this country say no problem. Yeah? What about flying the Confederate flag? Yeah? Does that, you know, wouldn't that depend on your motivation, if you see it as an example of Southern pride, or if you see it as an example of racism? But is racism included in Southern pride? I don't know. You know, probably depends on the person. Okay? So there's all these new kind of things, I think, that we need to think about, you know, in terms of this one of confusion, about what is virtuous and what is non-virtuous. Yeah? So I think this is the kind of thing, though, that we should discuss some, you know, like after lunch when we're talking about things, to bring some of these things up and see, and, you know, you apply our intelligence, yeah, and make some different examples.
We did, after we talked about Charleston at one of the UU groups 2 weeks ago, some of the homework was to go home and think about some of your biases and your own judgments and values. And it was really a very sensitive issue this past Monday. It took a while for people to step forward and talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the homework assignments at the weekly meditation class in town after Charleston was to look at our own biases and prejudices, and what a delicate topic that is, and it's difficult to talk about it. Yeah.
Part of it was that the perpetrator, we see him as so being almost kind of not in the human realm because of his thinking, but when in fact the same mind is under the control of the same afflictions, and how are not that dissimilar?
Yeah.
The basic ignorance, you know, that drives.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that's that verse. Quite interesting, isn't it? You know, there's a lot in there to think about. Okay. Then, verse 21. From non-virtue comes all suffering, likewise all negative rebirths. From virtue comes all positive rebirths, and the happiness within all rebirths. Okay, so this is, when we talk about the 4 principles of karma, this is the first one, yeah? That virtue always produces happiness, and non-virtue never does. Non-virtue always produces suffering, virtue never does. When we experience happiness, it's always from virtue, never non-virtue. When we experience misery, it's always from non-virtue, not virtue. Okay, so that's what he's saying here. Okay, now, the results of the karma themselves are not necessarily virtuous or non-virtuous, okay? And the karmic seeds are not virtuous or non-virtuous. The karma, the action itself, is virtuous or non-virtuous. The seed or the latency, the imprint, whatever you want to call it, is actually a non-associated abstract, non-associated compositional factor. Another abstract composites is the new term for it. Okay? So the action is virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral. But the seed, that's left from that, or if we talk the having happened of it, it's a seed of a negative action, not a negative seed. It's a seed of a negative action, a seed of a positive action. Okay? But the seed itself is something neutral. Okay? The result, most of the results are also neutral. If you get born as a human being, is a human birth, a human body, virtuous or non-virtuous? No, the body itself has no quality to it, and no ethical quality. It comes from a human rebirth, comes from virtue, but it isn't virtue. Okay. Similarly, the environmental results, where we're born, or if we happen to be in an earthquake, or we happen to be in a beautiful place, those environments themselves are neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. They're just an environment, but our being there is the result of virtue or non-virtue that we did, our own actions.
So a result of a non-virtuous action wouldn't be non-virtuous, but it would be suffering.
Yeah, but suffering itself is not non-virtuous. Okay.
It's neutral.
And
Meaning it's neutral.
what?
Meaning it's neutral.
Yeah. And happiness itself is neither virtue nor non-virtue. How you respond to the suffering is where you create virtue and non-virtue. How you respond to the happiness, how you respond to the neutral feeling, that's what, because that our response is our physical, verbal, and mental actions. Okay? So the karma is virtue or non-virtue. The motivation is virtue or non-virtue. Okay. Now, when we talk about the causally concordant result, okay, so the causally concordant result in terms of the experience, I criticize people, so people criticize me. Receiving criticism is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. Giving the criticism is non-virtuous, but receiving it is neither. It's just the result. Okay? People lying to us. We're talking about our karma, being lied to, not our karma, but, being lied to from our perspective. People lying to us, we're not creating virtue or non-virtue. Other people are creating non-virtue by lying. But the experience of being lied to is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous, although its cause was non-virtuous. Okay? That's in terms of the causal result corresponding to the experience. The causal result corresponding to the action, in other words, the habitual tendency to do that same action again. What do you think about that one? Is that going to be virtuous or non-virtuous?
If you're doing the action, it is.
Yeah. Okay, so that action, repeatedly doing the action, is you're creating more virtue or more non-virtue. Okay, so here, again, you can see why they say that that result is actually the worst of the results. Yeah, in terms of non-virtue, because it's the habit to do the same non-virtuous action again and again and again. Whereas even if you experience the result, the ripening result of being born in a horrible rebirth, that rebirth isn't virtuous or non-virtuous. And that rebirth you live through, finish the karmas used up. How you respond to being in the lower realm will create more karma. But that rebirth itself, is neither. But this result of the habitual tendency, in terms of non-virtue, it becomes more non-virtuous. In terms of virtue, thank goodness it becomes more virtuous. So this is why we're encouraged to do even small positive actions and abandon even small negative actions. So this is another one of the four principles of karma, that the karma will increase. So therefore, don't get lazy and say, well, it's just a little white lie, I don't need to abandon it. Or, well, setting up my altar in the morning is just a little virtue, I don't need to do it. Because these things, cumulatively have a strong power, especially in terms of the habitual tendency to do them again. Okay, so verse 22, thus dharma of upper rebirth is considered to be twofold. Okay, one should not engage in non-virtue through mind, body, or speech, but one should always engage in virtue through these three. Okay, so here he's really summing up how to practice, because this whole topic we're in now is all about higher rebirth and higher rebirth and the causes of higher rebirth. So remember, chapter 1 is about higher rebirth and the higher good. So the first section is higher rebirth. So the quintessential thing to remember, okay, concerning this dharma of upper rebirth, don't engage in non-virtue, physically, verbally, or mentally, and engage in virtue through your body, speech, and mind. If you don't remember anything else, remember that. Okay? Okay. And so, how do we get to the point of generating that determination? By thinking of the results of the actions, like I was talking about at the beginning of this talk. Thinking about the results of our actions inspires us to, abandon non-virtue, because we see it's only going to create more headaches and suffering, which we don't want, And if we want happiness, then it encourages us to create virtue. Yeah? So you're in the middle of having a discussion with somebody, and you can sneak in some kind of deprecating remark about somebody you're jealous of, And this is totally normal in human conversation, but you abandon doing it, even though it's somehow so tasty to, make some kind of derogative comment about somebody you're jealous of. Isn't it? It's kind of tasty. It's like, yeah, this person I'm jealous of, they really aren't that good. Look what they did. Yeah. But you choose, you've thought about the results of creating disharmony and of harsh speech, and you say, I'm not going to do it. And then at first you feel, oh, but I missed out on that perk of putting down that person, which indirectly should make me look better to these other people. Right? Yeah? Because we put down other people because then in comparison, we look great. So I lost that advantage. I didn't say that. But then if you think about it, for the people whose respect we really want to earn, does putting down other people behind their back earn the respect of the type of people we want to respect us? No. Okay? So if we remember that, then it becomes easier to, put the duct tape where it belongs. Yeah, our invisible duct tape. I always thought it was duck, D-U-C-K. I always wonder, why are they naming it after ducks, Yeah, it's not, what do they have against ducks? And then I realized one day it was duct tape, But it sounds, doesn't it, like duct tape? Yeah? Yeah, why are you picking on ducks?
There's a brand called duct tape. They make really poor duct tape.
But anyway, yeah, it pays off. Yeah, when you think of the people who you really want to think well of you. Okay? But sometimes our mouth is a little bit uncontrolled, and it's just so sweet to put in that kind of deprecating remark. Yeah. Okay. I almost did that this morning, except and my mind was rationalizing, but it wasn't my deprecating remark. I was going to quote somebody else who people respect, because somebody who people usually respect made this remark, and then, I can quote this person, and then it's putting down this other person, the third person. But then I said, no, I better not do that. Okay, so that's verse 22. Yeah, and then let's do. Oh, we're almost done with this section, so let's just go. So verse 23 is talking about the result of practicing, and so it's verse 23 and the first two lines of verse 24. So through this dharma, one is freed from rebirth as a hell being, hungry ghost, or animal. As a human or celestial being, one obtains all happiness, glory, and sovereignty. And through the concentrations, immeasurables, and immaterial absorptions, one experiences the pleasure of Brahma, and so forth. Okay, so the result of practicing this one, especially the previous verse, verse 22, always abandon non-virtue and engage in virtue, then the result of that is we'll be freed from rebirth as a hell being, as a hungry ghost, and as an animal, which it would be nice to be free from, wouldn't it, unless you're planning on being one of the Abbey cats. Yeah, which, you'll be pampered to death and greatly loved, but do you really want to be born in that form where you can't practice the Dharma? I don't think so. Okay? And then as a result of practicing virtue, you know, when we're born as we'll be born as humans or as gods, celestial beings, and we'll have very happy lives with happiness, glory, and sovereignty. So I think glory means, you know, I don't know, whatever, however you want to define glory. Yeah,
Fame, status.
yeah, it could be fame or status. Sovereignty, meaning being able to do what you want. You're not a slave or indentured servant or, you know, somebody. And then through practicing the concentration, so this is talking about the jhanas or dhyanas, okay, of the 4 material realms, the immeasurables, which apply to those same concentrations, the immaterial absorptions, the 4 formless absorptions. Okay, so by practicing these very deep states of meditation, then you get born in the form realm or the formless realms. Yeah. So, and you experience the pleasure of Brahma. So the god Brahma, the Hindu god Brahma, who thinks he's the creator of the universe and who other people think is the creator of the universe, actually is one of these gods born in the form realm. Okay? So you experience those pleasures, but again, all this pleasure it's temporal and temporary, because as soon as the karma that produced it is consumed, then you're off to, you know, some other kind of rebirth in samsara. But in terms of, you know, temporarily keeping us out of the lower realms and providing a good circumstance to continue to practice Dharma, many of these upper rebirths are really very conducive for that. Okay, so then the next 2 lines are a summary, the last 2 lines of verse 24. Such, in summary, is the Dharma for upper rebirth and its results. Okay, so there he's concluding this section. Okay, so here he's, you know, what he's doing is he's summarizing the causal relationship between abandoning the 13 actions to be abandoned and engaging in the 3 to be adopted. So what are the 13 to abandon? The 10 non-virtues, then? Avoiding intoxicants, avoiding wrong livelihood, and avoiding harming others. Okay? And then what are the 3 ones to practice? Love.
Benefiting or generosity.
Generosity.
Honoring those who are worthy of honor.
And honoring those worthy of honor. Okay? So to practice those. So we may say, oh, but there's more non-virtues than there are virtues. But the thing is, with the non-virtues, at least the 10 paths of non-virtue, not doing them is also virtuous, or doing the opposite is also virtuous. Okay? So it's important to have good motivation, because the motivation is the foremost thing that's going to determine the ethical, value of an action. And so for those reasons, it's really important to aspire for a good rebirth, for liberation, for full awakening, and then to monitor our mind and make sure that we're generating those kinds of motivations when we're acting. And when we're just sitting and thinking about things too, to have those good motivations. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
I'm just thinking about this attachment to the body,
Uh-huh.
and how we can balance that with valuing the precious human life, because it's the precious human life that we need to have in a number of lifetimes
Yeah.
to make any headway.
Yeah.
And so how to get away from this fear of losing the present.
Okay. Does valuing something mean that you have to be attached to it?
No,
But But what? But being attached to it is normal.
No,
No?
not like that. To get away from that attachment, because, you know, if you're standing up on the meadow and lightning starts,
Mhm.
you're going to have perhaps some fear of being struck by lightning.
Mhm.
So that whole attachment to the body comes up. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but just how to get rid of this.
Yeah. Well, attachment to the body, it really takes a lot of meditation. You know, really a lot of meditation, because we're so habituated with attachment to the body. So we got to start with the gross attachments to the body, okay? So with our gross cravings to be comfortable, just start with that. You know, the gross cravings of, I've got to have the kind of food I like. Yeah, and I've got to have the kind of temperature I like, and I've got to have the kind of bed I like, and I've got to have the kind of clothes I like, and the shoes I like, and the hair I like, and, you know, just these very gross attachments to our appearance and our very gross comfort. Start with that. You know, we've got to start with that. Because without overcoming that, how are we going to overcome attachment to having a body, you know? So we got to start with the gross stuff. And then slowly, as we start to overcome that, then we can deal with more and more subtle levels of attachment to the body. You know, which could include, you know, just letting go of this tremendous fear we have of being at all uncomfortable. Yeah, and getting used to, okay, you know, for example, it's precept day and I'm hungry now. You know, getting used to, well, it's okay to be hungry. You know, I'm not going to die because of it. I don't need to moan and complain. I don't need to break the precepts. You know, I can get used to it. Or, you know, whatever it is that we happen to be on again, you know. You age and you look in the mirror and it's like, who's this person? You know, can't I, like, gee, I'd look so much better without these wrinkles. You know? Kind of, the Buddha didn't ban Botox for nuns, you know? Or facelifts, yeah. What's wrong with that? Actually, you know, I'm supposed to be attractive because then other sentient beings will want to learn the Dharma from me. So, oh, let's get this. And they have something, you know, when I went to the eye doctor, to the doctor to get my moles checked, you know, something that will make your eyelashes grow longer. Yeah, so maybe we can do the, you know, have that. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So you know, how we're you know, you look yourself. These clothes, you know, they don't show my figure very well. Yeah. So, yeah. So it's just like get rid of that kind of gross attachment. Yeah. Or I used to have such beautiful hair. Yeah, when I met the Dharma, that was what was so hard for me, because I had hair down to here that I had, you know, it had taken me years to grow, and it was very beautiful, and I didn't want to cut it. Yeah, so I imagined what my body would look like as a corpse with beautiful long hair. And I thought, what use is that? You're lying in a coffin with beautiful long hair, and people are going to go by and say, oh, she has such beautiful hair. That, you know, that cured me of attachment to my hair. Okay? Yeah, so you apply the Dharma, you know, the Dharma antidotes. Yeah? Similar, you know, when you go to the Dharma for different tests or checks, sometimes it's not so comfortable. Yeah, the doctor, what did I say? To the Dharma. I meant to the doctor or to the dentist, you know? Yeah, and to just get used to it. Yeah, oh, I can, I can endure this.
Well, sometimes practicing the Dharma, you have to go through a certain level of discomfort as well to change old habits.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, to practice the Dharma, I have to get rid of some of these habits. Okay.